So, hello, English teacher friends. Welcome back. So, as promised, I'm trying to put together a video series of the 25 most commonly taught short stories in the American high school curriculum. And this is definitely a high flyer. Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway kind of gets taught across the board. So, what we'll do with this is hopefully have you all saying the following. I want you to say, holy cow, this guy's not lying. His templates work every single time we ask a kid to write an essay. So they can be used across the expository modes and from short story to short story to short story. The kid does not need to reinvent the wheel every time he or she sits down to write an essay. And for those of you that are very familiar with my work, it doesn't even matter what genre they're writing in, it doesn't matter what expository mode they're doing, if it's rhetorical analysis, argument persuasion, research, synthesis, it's two templates. You can bust them out every single time. So that's the glory of this is that, once students have mastered a couple of templates, then you can really focus on improving their ability to ascertain a text through good close reads. And then the battle's won. If you got good readers and good writers, you got a classroom of some brilliant kids. So let's jump right in. I'm not going to belabor um, this as much as I normally do because this is kind of towards the middle of the video series. And if you need further instruction on some of the aspects of the declarative and the inverted thesis or the syllogistic method, you can backtrack and look at some of those earlier videos to fill in some of your gaps. Or just email me and maybe we could have a conversation about some things. So, one thing that I always do at the beginning of my videos is I say this. When I work with teachers and push into departments and work with, um, districts or work with teachers through my mastermind class, always tell them that you got to Bob Ross your instruction. And here's what I mean by that. Bob Ross was always at the canvas and the easel, demonstrating for his students step by step how to construct a painting. And miraculously, he only used one template. He called it a heuristic, known as the wet on wet technique. Literally, every single time he painted, he used the exact same template. And the cool thing was, he showed his students how to navigate their way through that particular painting, manipulating that one template. And that's what I do when I host my writing workshops with teachers and with students. Is I get right to the canvas, right at my easel, and I say things like, "All right, guys, there's two ways to write an introductory paragraph. You can declare or invert. Here's a couple of declarative that I wrote. Here's a couple inverted that I wrote. On your mark, get set, go. Do it on your own." And it totally demystifies the writing process. So even your struggling and emerging writers can keep pace with that and put forth their best effort. So position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom and write with your kids. Show them your examples, show them your models, and you're going to see them really take off. So the first question that is usually asked is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And it's simple. You can declare or invert every single time. And if you declare the thesis, you're going to begin with the thesis. Very first sentence out of the gate, just boom, drop the thesis like it's hot, declaratively, succinctly, get it out of the way. From there, you're going to focus on some nuanced things that I have a lot of videos on that I'm not going to belabor right now. But this idea of sentence constructs, I'm a pupil of Strunk and White and their theory that there are 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. You're going to see my students really manipulate their syntax skillfully in order to achieve some voice rhythm and flow instead of having those stagnant, short, simple declarative sentences that follow each other in wild succession. So we've worked on that all academic year. My students also go through an intensive word study academy with me. So you're going to see that their vocabs are augmented with tier 2 level words. And what I mean by that is just your average run of the mill SAT level word. From there, every introduction you're going to see my students do, they're going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So following the beginning sentence with the thesis, it's stuffed with context and background. So exactly 4 sentences, no more, no less. Context and background, tier 2, sentence constructs, begin with the thesis. The other way to do this is to invert the thesis. And the only thing that changes is the placement of the thesis. Instead of leading with it, you're going to end with it. So end with the thesis, focus on sentence constructs, tier 2 level vocab, context and background, exactly 4 sentences long. You're going to see that in my literary analysis writing workshops that 99 out of 100 times you're going to see my students invert the thesis. And there's a reason for that. So there's a big seismic difference between performing literary analysis, which is the demand of the assignment, and performing plot analysis. Usually, when students start with plot, they never get out of plot. So I like my students to really get situated purposefully in their analysis out of the gate in that introduction. So I don't want to see any plot in there whatsoever. Sometimes they just kind of retell the story and rehash events and give a quick like cliff note synopsis of what's going on in the story instead of actual analysis of it. So you might be familiar with this slide. I use this a lot in my literary analysis videos, and I contend that in every single literary analysis prompt that's worded well and situating the students to perform literary analysis, there are 2 implicit questions. What is the authorial intent? And then how does the author construct meaning? If a student answers both of those questions out of the gate, they're blazing, especially if they have good alacrity with the nuanced things that we talked about earlier. They're going to come out of the gate with blazing speed. So it's going to be 4 sentences long. The first 3 sentences are going to focus on the authorial intent, and the last sentence is going to focus on the construction of meaning. And that's what it's comprised of. So let's take a look at an example here that a student wrote. The single biggest problem with the art of communication is the illusion that it is even occurring whatsoever. While words are continually coming forth from one speaker's mouth, their recipient is preoccupied with the task of formulating a response or is lost in some distant and disassociated thought. Words just go and go, but what gets communicated is often not contained in those words. And then in the 4th sentence, get to the construction of meaning. Here's where we're going to hear the student use terms and devices to get anchored in the thesis. Hemingway arrives at a sense of this imperfection through the motif of drinking and the symbol of the white elephant. So you use your terms and devices there in the end. So that's exactly 4 sentences. You can see some good sentence variation, and the vocab sounds very nice, good academic flair to it. And students can do this every single time they write. So here's a different student doing the exact same thing. One of the most important things in communication is to hear what isn't being said. In some cases, these spaces in communication are known as the pregnant moments, the place in words that are most latent with potential. Language is elusive, and truly good listeners know how to look at the nuance of every angle in order to ascertain the exactness of what is being said. Last sentence, let's do the same thing. How does the author construct meaning? This is especially true of the American and the girl in that what is not spoken is far more important than all the words they manage to utter. So just use your terms and devices. Um, and one of the things that I want to talk about is this. There's great debate right now, especially in the AP literature circle, as to whether or not teachers want the students to explicitly state their terms and devices or to withhold them until the body paragraph. You can see this one, the student withheld. I'm of this belief. I think it's more skillful to withhold, especially if you're writing your body paragraph syllogistically, because the first premise is where my students are going to state their terms and devices. So it's kind of redundant in a double layer um, of redundancy to do it in the thesis. So the last sentence of the introduction, and then the first immediate sentence of the body paragraph. It's just a layer of redundancy that I don't think is all that skillful. I know a lot of readers don't mind it, but I think it's one of those subjective variables that might hold back receiving the pizzazz point. There's just better ways to do it. So my better writers are going to do this. My struggling and emerging writers, I tell them that the thesis point is half the battle. So if you deem yourself to be, on the weaker side as a writer, make the professional decision to use your terms and devices in the thesis statement then, just to ensure that you're getting that 1 point. And I leave that to my students, come May for time of the exam, I leave that decision to them. They're smart enough and have done enough writing to know what they're capable of. So here's one more, and again, going to follow the exact same thing. Language is an imperfect instrument in terms of trying to help mankind express the essence of his pure truth. Words carry meaning, but words alone fall way short in capturing one's full intent. Couple this with things like an inability to listen and an inability to feel one's heart purely, and language just gets lost through the motif. And then look at here, this student's going back to the terms and devices. So you either have the terms there or you withhold them. This student's going with them. Through the motif of drinking and the symbol of the white elephant, Hemingway gets to the essence of this through the American and the girl. So I guess it's teacher preference, it's student preference. What's the main gist of the essay that's being assigned. But people often ask me my preference for the purposes of the AP Lit exam and the fact that my guys are going syllogistically in their body paragraphs. I'm a big fan of withholding. I don't think it needs to be stated doubly. I think readers are smart enough to figure it out without being told twice. So the next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? Nothing changes for those of you that are familiar with my work. You're going to proceed syllogistically yet again. And just as a quick refresher, and again, for those of you that are new to my work, go into the YouTube channel and look at some of the videos that give a thorough overview of this. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, and ultimately what Aristotle was doing at his school called the Lyceum was teaching things like oration, polemics, debate. And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, haha, I got it. I know what my real good orators are doing. They're arguing syllogistically. They have a line of reasoning that is exact. So a syllogism simply is when you're going from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say in the first premise, arsenic is deadly. Second premise, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. we'd all say that's bulletproof logic right there. That's real cogent thinking. And that's what we want to see on our students' papers when they write is real deliberate lines of reasoning. And what happens is when they write, and I'm gonna do a webinar or a video series on this. When you take a look at AP Lang and AP Lit papers, oftentimes, especially in Lit, the only thing the student is doing is offering forth the second premise. And that's why they read so plot heavy. There's just not enough analysis there. It's all cliff note summation in essence. So it's important that all three components be here in order for there to be a clearly delineated line of reasoning. So, in terms of performing literary analysis, the syllogistic method breaks down like this. So, you're going premise, premise, conclusion. So, the first premise is going to be an argument containing literary terms and devices. The second premise is where the textual support comes in. And I tell my students, you want to teeter-totter balance this out. You don't want to do one so much more at the expense of the other, where they're going to quote and paraphrase. And then the conclusion, and I really want to emphasize this, it's the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, is where the textual analysis comes. So I tell my students that the first premise is a promise, and the conclusion is the space where you want to have your links and your echoes that say, hey, I kept my promise and I kept my line of reasoning. So here's a question that the smart students ask. They say, all right, Mr. Kuhn, we know that introductory paragraphs are to be exactly 4 sentences long, no more, no less. How many sentences should a syllogistic body paragraph be? And I tell them, if you want enough support and analysis, you should shoot for 10 sentences. We've all read those essays where student submits body paragraphs that are 4 or 5 sentences long, and we scratch our heads saying, what's missing here? This is lacking. It's just not enough support. You can't advance the argument and develop it enough in such a shortly confined space. So it's essential that they have multiple layers of support and analysis. So I put a hard cap at 12 because I don't want them going wayward and bloviating and doing bird walks and, committing the cardinal sin of slipping into plot summary. So 10, shoot for 10, hard cap at 12. So let's take a look at the first 3 sentences. The first 3 sentences are always going to be the first premise. It takes 3 sentences to set up that argument. And I tell my students to begin where the author begins. So set up a chronology, have a sequential order to things, a nice arrangement that you've, delineated for your reader. And so start where Hemingway starts and just go methodically through it. So in the first 3 sentences, we're going to have our argument that gets anchored in terms and or devices. Hemingway's narrative structure and employment of the iceberg theory get to the heart of how his 2 characters communicate in spite of their inability to do so. Just as the visible tip of an iceberg hides a far greater mass of ice underneath the ocean's surface, so does Hemingway's dialogue belie the unstated tension between his characters. What is actually spoken between the American and the girl pales in comparison to the subtleties of what goes left understated. So we have to do something here. We have to ask ourselves, what did this student just promise us? If the first premise is a promise, what is that promise? So I'm expecting to hear stuff about the narrative structure, the iceberg theory, and then a great discussion of discourse and its breakdown, like its natural breakdown, its manipulative qualities, the spoken, the unspoken, how those types of things communicate meaning. So all of our quotes and all of our paraphrases need to be germane to that promise if we are to sustain a line of reasoning. So in the fourth sentence, we begin the second premise. And I tell my students, get into the text. Let's start quoting. Let's start paraphrasing. Let's draw. The American sets the scene in one of the first lines of dialogue in the story by ordering dos cervezas, but he did not speak to the bartender. His voice is entertained by a curtain. The couple sits at a bar at the train station, a curtain separating the outdoor tables from the inside of the bar to keep flies out. Here, the American calls to the bartender to bring 2 beers. However, the narrator observes that the American speaks to the curtain, implying that while these characters seem to speak to each other, a wall separates them that makes understanding each other impossible. So we got some good quoting, some good paraphrasing. Is it germane, though, to the promise? Well, let's go back. It is. Perfect. We're talking about discourse. We're talking about the breakdown of language. So kind of the impasse that is inherent to the nature of communication. So we're okay. This is a recurrent problem throughout the story. The pretext for the couple's gathering is to broach the topic of having an abortion, but neither seems capable of mustering up the courage to do so forthrightly. It is clear what the American wants, but he does not have the ability to say it. Instead, he passive-aggressively states that if you don't want to, you don't have to. I wouldn't have you do it if you didn't want to, but I know it's perfectly simple. So we got a couple of layers of support. That's perfect. And again, the quote is germane. While admitting the decision to have the operation rest with her, he promotes the procedure as safe and simple, which in effect shows his cards. Although he never clearly states what he wants, he clearly lobbies for her to have the operation, as he will not stop bringing the idea up. In fact, he falls short of badgering her. But rather than revealing his true intentions, he dances around the topic, leaving her to ultimately make the decision. What is ironic about this language dance is that he refers to her as jig, a type of dance. In this way, his language teeters on being manipulative and coursing. So before we look at the conclusion, let's just reassess the textual support. So we look at the promise again. Do we have everything covered in terms of the support there? We've hit it. So everything's connected. The line of reasoning's intact. So in the conclusion, let's see if we can echo one of the introductory paragraphs that we listened to and then fully shake hands back to the promise of the first premise. So beneath the tip of the iceberg, it is clear that this couple does not have a future. So much more divides them above and beyond their inability to truly communicate. Hemingway, indirectly, makes one thing clear. She will proceed with the operation, and they will go their separate ways. So, brought it back to the iceberg, brought it back to the thesis, wrap a bow up, put the conclusion on. Usually just takes 2 to 3 sentences. So that is how the template creates a syllogistic body paragraph. So the line of reasoning is perfectly intact. There's plenty of support and analysis to fully hammer home an argument. So that's good writing. And it goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. The sentence structures are very varied. Tier 2 level vocabulary, great academic voice, some pizzazz to it, some spunk, and this kid's a good writer. It bodes well for them to write this well. So let me wrap this up. And so anticipate more of these short stories coming. I'm using them myself in my juniors class, my general ed juniors. We're going to be doing a lot of short stories. I'm finding that it's becoming increasingly difficult in COVID teaching to teach full length text, big girthy text. Kids just don't have the stamina the drive or the interest. So I'm doing a lot of poetry and short stories, but I'm also using short stories a lot to fill in the gaps for FRQ2 for the lit exam. So I'll get these 25 done and post a couple a week until I've met that obligation. In the meantime, though, I'm slated once a month to do free webinars with Perfection Learning. We're going to be doing various topics each month. I got one coming up on my alternative grading methods. We're going to do one on my Plato's Plato discussion model. And I got a bunch of stuff up my sleeve that I've done over the years that we'll let out of the bag. And then I'm doing some side projects with the National Writing Project. I'll keep the groups abreast of those as I learn more. And then the project that I'm most proud of and most eager to tackle is the textbook I'm collaborating on with Tim Freitas. So we're both knee deep in writing that, and don't have a definitive time to release the book yet. It's coming though, so quicker than later. And one of the things that I'm doing at this moment is gathering some research. I want to work closely with teachers that are willing to take my methodologies into the classroom and really experiment kind of in like a laboratory setting to see how students and teachers respond to my templates, and then some of my other things like the Plato's Plato discussion, the Nuance Academy, the Word Study Academies, things of that nature. So I created a course called the Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind. And what we're doing is gathering a small group of teachers, and we're meeting every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 straight weeks. And these teachers are taking my stuff into the classroom and just experimenting. And then we're all coming together, we're reporting, we're sharing, we're troubleshooting. I'm overlooking everyone's shoulder, there for plenty of support. And then we're just going to gather that data, and I'll use it to construct certain portions of my end of the textbook. So if that's looking like something you'd be interested in, if you need a retool, a revamp, a redesign, or just a kick in the pants to get motivated as a writing instructor again, then it might be a perfect professional development opportunity for you. So if you want to learn more, you can drop me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com, even if you just want the PowerPoint that I used for this writing workshop. If you want to use it with your own kids, I can pass that on to you. If you have any questions, just email me. And then I do have a website that has a lot more information about the mastermind, and that's www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So hopefully you found this to be useful. And for now, happy teaching, happy writing, and I will continue with more short stories in the coming weeks.